Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. On this episode, I'm really excited to have Greg Bailey. He's a doctor, he's a serial entrepreneur. His previous companies have a combined market cap valuation over $28 billion, and he is redefining the way we're all going to age and keep us from getting diseases in the first place. I'm really excited to talk about Juvenescence and all the things you're doing. Greg, thanks for making time for this.
Pleasure. Look forward to chatting with you, Jess.
So let's jump right into Juvenescence. Can you talk about this idea of helping people live 10 years longer?
Yeah, so it was 14 years ago now. I started meeting the people who were involved in longevity. Initial person was Luigi Fontana, who did a lot of the early research on caloric restriction, which at the time was the number one way to live longer, healthy, 1,800 calories for men, 1,200 calories for women. And then the next year I met Walter Longo, and he said you can get the same effect for 5 days once every 3 months if you eat 800 calories. You only ingest 800 calories, and no meat products, only healthy carbs and fats. And he said you literally reset your body. And then the next person was Walter Bortz, who was head of gerontology at Stanford. And he said that exercise, was 60% of how you age. I respectfully disagree. I think there's also nutrition plays a huge role. But he said if you are fit, you mentally and physically decline at 0.5% a year, unfit 2% a year. Those are the big numbers. So I realized that there's nothing magical about those things. They must be doing something on a cellular level, whether it's not eating or eating intermittent fasting or exercise. And so I started looking at the scientists who were involved in this sector, and they were discovering the pathways of aging. And I do know that when scientists know the pathways, they're going to figure out how to manipulate them. And so in 2017, we started Juvenescence to find drugs to slow, halt, or reverse aging, with a big emphasis on increasing how long you live healthy, or your health span, which will increase how long you live as your lifespan, but more focused on making sure that you're healthy longer.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the previous successes coming into this. Maybe let's talk about, best-selling drug for prostate cancer, best-selling drug in its class for migraines. Can you tell us what they are, and can you tell us why they worked?
Sure. The first company was Medivation. It was run by David Hung and Patrick Machado, and I came in to help them with the financing and become a board member. And we got the prostate cancer product out of UCLA, Charles Sawyer's lab. And it was a very clever pathway to prevent the cell from becoming malignant. And it worked. And it didn't have any terrible side effects. And basically, people who are dying at 6 months to live were now getting multiple years longer. And so it does around $5 billion a year in sales. And so it was a fantastic development journey, and hats off to just a great team. My good fortune has been working with extraordinary people. And that drug's called Extendi. Enzalutamide is the chemical name, being sold globally now by Pfizer and Astellas. Pfizer bought us out. We were partners. We brought Astellas in as a partner after getting positive clinical results because we needed money. And so that one sold to Pfizer for $14 billion. Then next one was Biohaven. My business partner, Declan Dugan, longstanding, came forward with two scientists who are also drug developers, Vlad Korich and Rob Berman, in 2013, and said that they had a product that they thought would be good for general anxiety, depression. And we decided that we would try to get multiple drugs to be right on one, because neurology and psychiatry are very difficult areas as far as running clinical trials. And then we in-licensed a drug from Bristol Myers and that had phase 2 clinical data. And we were able to replicate that, and then subsequently were successful in phase 3. And again, without significant side effects. That drug's called Nurtec. It's on the market. If you're in the United States, we may be irritating you with television commercials with Khloe Kardashian and a Green Beret who was almost suicidal because of migraines, and that we were able to alleviate them. So well-known pathways, CGRP, and yeah, just a fantastic drug, which not only in half an hour takes away the migraine, but also prevents you from getting a migraine for 2 days. So it's prophylactic. If you're getting married that week, you could take it every other day to make sure you're fine on the weekend.
Oh wow. And what's that one doing revenue wise these days?
Pfizer bought us out in October. It was on track for over $1 billion in sales. The anticipated earnings could be as high as 6 billion a year globally.
Wow, that's incredible. I've heard you talk about investing in the area, and I thought you had such an interesting thing to talk about with analogies and communication, and how many people get scared by biotech. It just feels risky, feels like a black box. They don't understand it, so they just don't touch it in the first place. Can you talk about some of the
Yes.
analogies that you've made to help people maybe think a little differently about it?
Yeah. So it's very similar to mining. You drill a hole, you drill multiple holes, you hope you hit oil or gold. And if you do, your price of your company goes up by 15x. If you don't, it gets cut in half. So it has a similar sort of format, and people seem to be very comfortable with mining and not comfortable here. Oh, I don't understand the science. So, it doesn't make sense. So, a retrospective study covering 8 years, they found out your chance of having a positive phase two clinical trial, which is done after a phase one where you prove safety. Now you're trying to prove it actually works. And phase one can often be done on healthy people. Now you're dealing with people who actually have the pathology. You have between a 22 and a 54% chance of success, which is a hell of a delta. It's 22% for oncology and autoimmune. Oncology because it's so tricky, and autoimmune because the sugar pills people do really well. The placebo is very high. And 54% for antibiotics or insulin because they worked in phase one, they're going to work in phase two. And so we felt we could always be right one and three. So, basically you get 15 to 20 times your money if you're right on a phase two. So, I tell people just to put it into a way that they can understand. How long would you play at a table in Las Vegas or Monaco if one out of every three hands you won 20 times your money? But you can't play just once because then you have a 66% chance of failure. So every company, whether it was Medivation, we were trying to get 10 drugs to be right on two. Fortunately, our first two worked. And then one failed in phase three, the other one didn't. And then at Biohaven, again, we had multiple drugs, and our first one worked. And because we set it up as a British Virgin Island company, we were able to sell the drug and keep the company. So basically, we sold the drug for 11.6 billion, and we kept the company, which is now worth 1.5 billion, which normally we wouldn't have happened. And I think we have the rest of our pipeline to see, how successful we can be with them, make multiple bets. And also the other thing I say to people is the type of thing, if you're looking at it as somebody who doesn't do biotech, look at the people and think, are they the people that I would hire to find these drugs? I would tell you that at Juvenescence, we have the former head of drug development at Pfizer, former head of clinical research at Pfizer. Richard Marshall is the new CEO. Richard developed 5 drugs in 4 years. And just to give you perspective, in 2022, there were only 32 new chemical entities approved. He is fantastic at developing drugs. He received a CB from the Queen of England. Are those the people, if you were running a big fund, that you would ask to find the drugs? And there probably are. So not only are they finding them, they're actually going to develop them. So you get that added advantage. So we think we can write one on three. And at Juvenescence, we have over 7 drugs, 5 that should be in the clinic in the next 12 to 18 months. It will modify how you age.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. We've got a lot of founders and CEOs that listen to the show, and this idea of, whether it's choosing co-founders or bringing on top talent for a company, there's so many people that have a great resume or that interview well. And then there's a smaller number of people that actually are awesome, right? When you think about sorting that difference, when you think about that decision tree of who you're going to work with on your next one, what does that look like for you, sorting through the difference between people who look good on paper, the people who interview well, versus the people who can perform?
Well, I'll immediately confess I've never met a con man I didn't like. So, we can all be fooled. generally in this sector, and I would imagine it transcends other sectors, you want to see somebody who's really, really knowledgeable. They've done it, ideally done it before. It's fantastic. And that doesn't mean ran a big company and did it before. It means, in my case, developed a drug and was successful, taking it from ground zero all the way through. So they know how to do that. The other huge thing, if it's a CEO, is communication. They've got to be able to talk to you at this level or this level, depending on who the investor group is. David Hung, the first CEO, he could take it to any level you wanted. So an investor who didn't know anything about biotech, or 16 PhDs at Cornell who were there to grill him. So you have that. So, and that is huge. And I've just come to terms with the fact that, because I have some CEOs that I work with who are not being as successful as they should be, and I have two who just crushed it. And they knew they were building a billion-dollar company, so they weren't concerned about dilution. I was wrong, Jess, because I was like, oh, we can do this at a higher valuation. Let's wait. We can get it up there. And they're like, no, I need the money now, because what I'm building, this is going to be a decimal point. And they were right, and I was wrong. And so I think that that's really key, is that you believe in the size, if you have the opportunity that it can be that big, and that you do everything to do it fast, because this is a competition.
What's an example of that, of things to do fast?
Well, I guess the biggest example was our cancer drug at Medivation. J&J was 6 months ahead of us. If they had gotten a year ahead of us, we couldn't have run our clinical trial, because we were dealing with people who only had 6 months to live. And if you had an approved good drug, how could you possibly put somebody on a placebo sugar pill? So we had to be there in the first 6 months, so that they hadn't finished their trial, so we could recruit. At Biohaven, our competitor was AbbVie. They had a drug called Ubreville. And again, they were ahead of us by, well, they weren't ahead of us. We're at the same pace, but they were able to get a pass. You pay $100 million and you can accelerate the path with the FDA. And so basically they leapfrogged us and got in ahead of us. And, but if we'd been too far behind them, again, you just wouldn't have been able to get market share. So it's most important you got there to the clinic quickly. And I'm sure it's true if you're, in generated AI, ChatGPT, OpenAI, first one there, Google's scrambling to be second. So it's important. And then in companies and businesses where there's a network effect, extraordinarily important.
When you think about the idea of going as fast as possible without making mistakes that are too big, how do you think about weaving in between that?
Yeah, the difference between a good CEO and a bad CEO is the decisions they make. And one of my favorite quotes, Jess, is a Wall Street person who were named unnamed. And they said, why have you been so good for so long? He said, because I make 1,000 mistakes, but I only make them once.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the key, is that ability to learn, keep moving it forward, and being willing to make a mistake, which is obviously a big deal in Silicon Valley. They want you to just, jump, test it, try it, as opposed to being frightened that you might fail.
Yeah. Thinking about what a capital-intensive industry this can be, can you give us some tips on financing multi-billion-dollar businesses?
The key thing, and I think it's probably true of any business, and it's particularly true in my business of drug development, is having enough money to get through the next inflection point and giving yourself runway to raise the next money. So, a lot of investors go, well, I can't invest in biotech because after phase 2, you still don't have revenue. True, but if you've had a wildly successful clinical trial in migraine or in anti-aging, where I can demonstrate, we've got a product going to the clinic this year that we believe is going to add 10 healthy years to your lifespan. If I have that and I can show that in a phase 2 clinical trial, you went in at $20-30 million, you're coming out at $400 or $500 million, and without any income, because big pharma is going to be lined up, outside your door to do a deal with you. So we need to make sure that we have enough money to get through that clinical trial, enough money to be able to run that auction, which is what we did very successfully at Medivation, to get in that big pharma partner and with the right one and the right amounts of money up front and the milestones. And yeah, the milestones were profound. 100 to $200 million up front, 500 to 700 million in milestones, plus 40 to 50% of the profits.
Yeah. Um, when you think about that and you think about what's possible, I mean, it's going to lead into this. You're partially answering this question already, but like I've heard you talk about. We were talking before the show about Bank of America thinks that this is like AI 3 years ago. This is like a $500 billion business overnight
In the next few
someday soon.
years. Yeah.
Why do they have that opinion?
Um, you know, the number one thing when Americans are asked that's most important to them is their health. And I don't think it's unique to the United States. So, you know, if I can give you 10 more healthy years of living, if I can give you a product that we have that hopefully will be in the clinic in the next year and a bit, which would prevent you from getting Alzheimer's disease, I mean, you take that all day long, right? And the other thing that I don't think they're appreciating, I think Bank of America gets, is there's going to be a blurring of the line between supplements and drugs. There's going to be clinically validated supplements. By way of example, we know that vitamin D3, coming out of COVID, we know that it actually does have incredibly positive effects. And so if you and I were the only ones allowed to sell vitamin D3 for the last 3 years, it would have been 10 or $15 billion a year. That's a world-class drug if you had that. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of this. So I think Bank of America says that. Citibank says it's going to be one of the top 10 most disruptive technologies of this decade, anti-aging. So it's coming, and it's going to happen so much faster than people think, how fast these
Yeah.
products are going to come to be available.
Well, as I was doing the research, I was almost late for the show because I was like so excited. I kept watching your interviews, I kept watching your things, and I was like, it's pretty thrilling, some of this stuff. Can you talk about the frog that is not supposed to be able to regrow a leg, that regrew a leg?
Yeah, hats off to Professors Levin and Kaplan at Tufts University. So what they saw is, well, first the state of the art, and this company just raised $6 billion, Altos, and they're working with something called Yamanaka factors. And what Yamanaka and his other scientists won the Nobel Prize for was there's factors that cause tissues to regrow. So I can regrow a nerve or an artery. What Professor Levin and Kaplan figured out was the fact that when you go from embryo to fetus, your cells talk to each other. You're going to become the bone. I'm going to become the muscle. Become the nerve, the arteries. And it's not your choice. You're literally told what to become. And they figured out that the way the cells do this is by electrical impulses, and that if they could decipher that, they could regrow a hand or a leg. And so they started out with worms, and then they were able to move on to frogs, as you said, that don't grow limbs, shouldn't regrow a limb, and they cut off the leg and were able to regrow a functional leg. They can actually take the eye tissue as it's about to form your eyeball and cause it to grow a hand. I mean, it's that profound. And so
That was the frog that had the hand growing out of its head, right?
Yeah, that'd be the one. Yeah. And so, yes, it's extraordinary what's happening.
I think what was fascinating to me was like how you anticipated the skeptical part of my brain, and you immediately went from amphibians to mammals and talking about like the mouse finger that was growing back.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously people go, the Mexican salamander can regrow, so maybe this is just something unique to reptiles or amphibians. But now we, cut off the digit of a mouse and we're able to regrow the first one. We haven't regrown the knuckle, but the first bone and tissue we've regrown. So obviously this is, profound for amputees. And so it's very exciting. And when we get the next quantum computing, that's going to truly be, very important as we unlock this discussion that the cells have, this communication they have to cause tissues and limbs to form. So the difference between what Altos is doing and what Professor Levin is doing is Altos is like soldering a computer to change something, and what Levin is doing is like writing the software that causes your laptop to change, to add a new function. And in this case, regrowing a limb in a creature that shouldn't regrow a limb.
Well, can you talk about this, like, the idea with the things with the livers and like 400 animals have lived longer than they would have, and the lymph node in the liver, and explain all that?
Yeah, so every now and again with Professor Levin, I was blown away when I actually thought it wasn't true when somebody was pitching me, and I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll call the guy. What's my downside? But obviously extraordinary what he's done. And similarly with Eric Lagasse, he basically we have 200,000 people who have liver fail in the United States, and we have 8,000 donor livers, and 2,000 of them have to be discarded because they don't fit. They're the wrong. They can't get them to the right place, so they don't, or it's not a suitable fit as far as immunologically. And what he did was just incredibly creative. I'm curious. I need to ask him what other tissues he tried this on. But he thought, what if I took liver cells and I injected them into the lymph node? Would that keep them alive? And not only does it keep them alive, he can turn a lymph node into a secondary liver. So in the 400 animals that would have died because of liver failure, he was able to keep them alive because their lymph node became a functional liver, doing biologically what they were supposed to do.
Okay, he's not an Italian guy who works in England, is he?
No, Eric Lagasse at the University of Pittsburgh, where they invented the
Okay.
liver transplant. He's done the same thing now with kidney tissue to turn a lymph node into a kidney, with the thymus, which is what involutes or degrades at 3% a year, starting at 25. It's why people in their 70s and 80s were dying of COVID, and 20-year-olds were shaking it off. And also with pancreas, which potentially would be a cure for type 1 diabetes.
And for people who aren't familiar with things like CRISPR and understanding like why this is possible, can you explain the idea of like snipping DNA and rewriting it, and like giving people an analogy who don't have your background?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically the DNA uncouples to create RNA, which can create proteins that sustain our bodies. And it's not absurd for me to be able to cut a DNA because it already does this sort of breaking. And so what they do is with CRISPR is they're able to, for hemophilia, edit out the component of the DNA that would cause this person to bleed to death with a minor trauma. And extraordinary, Jennifer Doudad, and I've forgotten the gentleman at Harvard. He's almost invented it at the same time, which also goes back to our original comment, Jess, about timing and speed, because they literally both sort of unlocked CRISPR contemporaneously and are, arguing over who should get, the most credit for it, and both created companies, separate companies with CRISPR.
That's wild. There's a great book by Stephen Johnson called Where Good Ideas Come From. It talks about,
Yeah.
innovation that happens because the adjacent possible of like all these other things have been bubbling up. So now the ability to invent the next thing exists, which is kind of exciting.
Yes.
Like I was watching that conference you're speaking at in Saudi Arabia with those other folks, like, and how there's multiple people playing in this longevity space. It's got to like be helping the adjacent possible for all of you guys come up with better
Yeah.
and better things.
I'm so excited about our sector in general because it's very collegial. You look at big pharma, and for 15 years, they all traced amyloid, all blew an extraordinary amount of money. And it would have been wonderful they talked to each other. We probably would have got, one of the Alzheimer's drugs in half the time, but they wouldn't do it. And there's a lot of interplay amongst us. Ned David, who developed Unity, contacted me with an opportunity. Sinclair and I have chatted about things to do together. David Sinclair out of Harvard. So yeah, it's amazing, and that to me is the way it should be. How to accelerate this process. It's almost a
Yeah.
responsibility. If you and I know how to allow people to live longer healthy, you have a responsibility to move that forward.
Well, I think we need to give a shout out to Nathan and Arwen at Frontrunner for getting us connected. But
Yeah,
but when we
no,
started, we got you got to come to our events. We're gonna do more of them when you're out.
I
Um,
look forward to it.
but you know, so I've got a niece with epilepsy. I've got a wife and kids with autoimmune issues, and like
Oh,
I've been hearing about ketosis and the advantages for epilepsy. So when you talk to me, and I brought my goodies pack, so anybody who's on YouTube watching this, okay, can you explain what I've got here? I'll pull these things out.
yeah, so the Buck Institute is 200 of the top scientists in the world trying to unlock and solve aging. And what you have in your hand is a packet of powder and a drink. Both of them will put you into ketosis. When Eric Verdon, the CEO of the Buck, and John Newman said we have this product, they said this is going to be amazing for heart failure because we know that if you're in ketosis, it has all these profoundly wonderful effects on your heart. Cardiac trials are a nightmare. So I said, I'm not sure I can do that, because we were a startup company at the time with $12 million. But I said, I can get it on the market as a supplement really quick because it's basically a food. This is like you eating a big fatty thing, but very healthy fats. And so they thought about it for a couple of days and said, okay, we're willing to go the supplement route. So what you have in your hands is that supplement. And
This one.
the
Well, are they the
left-handed,
same thing?
the same
But this
thing.
one tastes good. What am I looking at?
One has no taste, so it can be put in a drink without messing up the drink. Our president takes it in his coffee.
Okay.
I put it in a vegetarian shake. And the other one is a drink, which tastes sort of like a tropical fruit yogurt, which is amazing because ketones do not taste good.
Okay.
And so basically, what we did with any of the supplements, we have a number that we're bringing to market. We bring pharmaceutical rigor to the supplement industry. So we run the clinical trial. I can tell you, within 15 to 30 minutes of you taking this, Jess, you will be in ketosis, and you'll stay there
Okay.
for 3 to 6 hours.
So I was reading the stuff, and it said maybe for the first couple of days only do half, or is that the mix, or is that this too?
Now, basically, this is a whack of fat that your stomach is not used to.
Okay.
And so I have all these macho friends going, "Oh yeah, I can do this," and they slug it back, and you're like, "Whoa!" It takes a bit of getting used. I now drink the whole thing without, and I'm like 4 days in because we just released this on Amazon, and I can do it without incident. But yeah, no, take it slowly. But the reason you want to be in ketosis, which goes back to the person with epilepsy, it's now considered a ketogenic diet is considered one of the things one should do. What we've learned in the last 10 years is I don't have to go on a ketogenic diet, which are not particularly healthy and not sustainable because if you really want to do it, it's macadamia nuts and avocado for every day, and never, have any carbs, no pizza, no apples. So not sustainable, but I get the same effect by doing this. Now,
So
interestingly, we've now turned that product in. This is 3 to 6 hours to one that's 24 hours, and we're going to do a clinical trial in heart failure now.
wow.
Should-
Okay. So I know you're not going to give like medical advice, but let's use an example that my niece who has epilepsy buys this off Amazon. Why does ketosis help somebody with epilepsy?
Your heart, it's still equivocal. So this, if you had the top scientists, they'd argue about this.
Okay.
But some of them will say that your heart prefers ketones and your brain prefers sugar. But your brain would be better served if it used ketones as a substrate and that it has neuroprotective. There's a lot of third-party research, not us, where it shows that it plays a profound role. It may even play a role in dementia. We're beginning to learn that as well. It's just a better energy source. So your cells can use protein, fats, or sugar. So the sugar we know that's good is the glucose. The fat that we know is something called BHB, which is what that breaks down into at the liver. And we know that there's a slew of proteins that your cells need as building blocks. So this is just a food. This is incredibly safe, other than if you take a slug of it right off the bat, for your stomach. The Department of Defense in the United States is doing it's given us a $10 million grant with Ohio State University to test this, because people who take it, and the reason it's called cognitive switch is because they're more mentally aware and they're energized. And obviously, which would be fantastic for someone deployed in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So let's say, later today, I drink half this. Or should I do it in the morning? Should I do it at night? What's better? What's worse? Does it matter?
Couple of things. One is I want to have this ketotic state, and I don't want the sugars competing with the ketosis. So I personally do it in the morning after I've had a vegetable drink. So I got something in my stomach, which is very important because, again, you're getting this whack of fat. I may eat nuts. I sometimes have nuts with it as well. And then I drink the whole thing, but I would tell you, take a sip, wait 10 minutes, see if you feel fine. If you feel fine, take the next swig. And then if that's still 10 minutes, then take the last one. So then I know from that point in time till, the end of the afternoon, I'm in ketosis. We also know that when you're in ketosis, your blood becomes acidic and it's a potent anorexin, so you don't feel hungry. So this allows me to eat have one meal a day in a small window, because I took it this morning and I don't feel hungry, and it's like 2 p.m.
And so is it bad to eat in a period of time after I've had it?
No, it's a different effect, because now it's sugar and fats coursing through your system, but it's still good to have this high dose of fats. There's lots of people who have it with breakfast. I actually have it at night if I'm going out, because I can have that, get the energy boost, and fall asleep 5 minutes after taking it. And I don't have the same effect with coffee.
Yeah,
I have coffee, I don't fall asleep 5 minutes later.
What about more of a protein breakfast? Because I had the metabolism of a 14-year-old boy till my late 30s, and then one day I sneezed and gained 20 pounds, right? So my 16-year-old bet me, we did a no sugar bet. Whoever had sugar that month owed the other person $40. And I dropped 2 pant sizes that month.
Wow.
Right? 2 notches on my belt. I was like, well, I don't want to just gain it back and go back to having a double chin. So I've been doing kind of this protein for lunch, light carbs or no carbs. Sorry, protein for breakfast, light carbs or no carbs for lunch. And then I can probably eat whatever for dinner, or I'm never going to eat a roll. I'm saving that for ice cream. Okay.
Right. Know your vices.
You know what I mean? For me, and I stay and I maintain with that. Right. And it's not really a diet. I consider more like a lifestyle, but with this, would I not necessarily want to do a protein breakfast and then this, or does it matter?
No, protein breakfast would be fine, because it's sugar or the bad actor, as you rightly pointed out. Now, you may want to read Scott Simpson's book, who claims we massively overeat protein, which is very detrimental to our liver and our kidney. He said he's a zoologist.
What's the book called?
Don't remember. He says the optimum diet across all mammalian species is 70% carbs, 15% protein, and 15% fat. The carbs are healthy carbs, so it's the Mediterranean diet: fruits, vegetables, olive oil, things like that. It's not Doritos and milkshake. So
Krispy Kreme.
The 15% is a little bit erroneous in my mind. It may work for other animals; it doesn't work for humans. It's probably closer to 20 or 25%, I would think, for humans. And as you age, you definitely need more, because you don't absorb it as much. And if you're Michael Phelps, and you're burning 12,000 calories a day, then you need to massively overeat protein, to keep muscle mass. So if I work out hard, I skew my protein that day. But otherwise, I try to limit it a little bit in how much I have. And I really focus on the 10 to 12 servings of vegetables.
And so tell me this guy's name again.
Scott Simpson. He works at the Perkins Institute in Australia.
So this is a tough thing for me, and I think most people without medical backgrounds and stuff. There's so much contradictory experts who are so confident in themselves and have their devotees, right? It's almost like a religion. Oh, this guy, right? What is it about what is it about this guy that you like?
I was impressed that it came from across other mammalian species. B is, and I do agree with you. I mean, they have the thing that they've discovered, and it's what they discovered, so they're very proud of it, and they bang on about it. And I think that I want to see the research, I want to see the science, and I want to see them admit they're wrong. Which was a huge problem for me with COVID with the experts because they wouldn't say, by the way, I mean, we were wrong. That was their data at the time. We made this statement. It's what I like about Peter Attia or Adia, is he'll change his mind, based on the data. And so, I don't want them selling the product. So, if I'm promoting, cognitive switch, disclaimer, it's my company, there's other ketone esters, there's HVMN. So I'm not as happy with the ketone salts. I'm not sure they do it. I like to see clinical studies. We've done them. I want to see other people do it and make sure that they're also getting a high quality product. So yeah, but be mindful of that. This is, the other thing is in my sector, you walk into whatever drugstores in your geography, whether it's Walgreens, CVS, Duane Reade, Boots in England, you're going to see 100 products that claim they're anti-aging and they're not. So when we started Juvenescence, I said, we have to be holier than thou because I have to make you trust me. I have to, convince you that when I say the cognitive switch increases, lifespan in mice, ketone esters by 13.6%, that's based on a clinical trial. And there's lots of people who say that ketone diets are not good for you because they've got a lot of bad actors in what people consider ketogenic diets. So I have to build trust and credibility. And I will, if the study comes back and it doesn't show that it does what we think, we'll stop selling it. Because I need you to trust me. And also we're a pharmaceutical company. So I need you to believe that my drug that's going to, not allow you to have 10 years longer, that goes into clinical trials this year, you can trust me when I say that. I haven't fudged my results.
Yeah, it's a difference between short-term thinking, long-term thinking, right?
Yeah.
Leave the morality out of it. Honesty is very profitable over the long term.
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody in my company understands that this is, the zeitgeist. This is how we see the world. That this is so important what we're doing, and we need to have trust and credibility to be able to sell a product. Which is why I'm comfortable saying what I said about cognitive switch.
Yeah. Well, I want to translate that back, I feel so lucky to have had, other billionaires on the show and people who built billion-dollar businesses and to learn from them. And one of the things that is so interesting to me is I often see with you guys this intensity about destination and then a humility to find out you're wrong. This has been the most surprising thing of guys build businesses in the tens of millions, in the hundreds of millions, in the billions, and then the 10 billion plus is in my experience, the further up, the more decimal points you add, the more likely the founder was to be listening for disconfirming evidence instead of just living for the guys in the tens of millions are so much more likely to be preaching the gospel and just constantly looking for proof they're right, where the multi-billion-dollar ones, they're listening, it's they've been able to hold their ego down and they're trying to find the perfect puzzle piece for their client's problem. And so they're more interested in finding friction that they can eliminate than confirming how smart they are or something. Do you relate to that, or how would you say that differently, or what do you think?
It's a mandatory, I told you 66% of drugs are going to fail in phase 2, so it's constantly, and it's surprising what it is. And also the placebo effect is extraordinary, how sugar pill works. So yeah, a great deal of humility. If you're a drug developer, you're humble, because science keeps spanking you down. And I think that it's important, when we ran a clinical trial on one of our drugs, the FDA said we ran it so well in phase 2, they counted it as a phase 3. And a lot of the people, and it's the reason I have 10 drugs instead of 1 at all of my companies, that's what we're going for at Juvenescence, is because I'm not sinking or swimming on the first drug. So I will run a clinical trial called a go no go trial. I want to know as fast as possible with the least amount of money spent whether it's going to work. And if it's not, move on. And if I only had one product, it's like, no, I'm going to do a clinical trial not to fail. I'm doing a clinical trial so I don't spend more money. And big pharma appreciates that when you run trials that way. So I don't, in other sectors, I think it's smart because otherwise you're spinning your wheels. Let's know, very soon if this is going to work or not. And if not, move on to the next one.
How do you think that founders and CEOs can stretch the humility muscle, to actively, that honest, that radical self-honesty, that passion to win, the humility to find out we're wrong? How do we grow that in ourselves?
It's an interesting balancing act, and I don't know that I have a great answer to that, Jess. I think that I think you unfortunately have to learn it. It's like me telling a child, don't touch the element on the stove, it's hot. And I walk away and I hear, ouch, behind me. I go, you touched it. I mean, there's just some things you have to do to realize I shouldn't do them. And I think Bezos failed at his first business. There's lots of people who've gone on to, Sam Walton really didn't build what he built until his 50s. So I think there's a lot of, having failed and realizing, no, if I'm going to spend time on Juvenescence, it's, I want to be spending my time wisely. So I need to make sure that this is, something good, or find the next thing.
Yeah.
And so some get lucky, Zuckerberg nailed it the first time. I think he's had a bunch of humbling experiences along the way where he's probably learned it, with projects he's brought to market that haven't worked. But he moves on to the next one. Good for him. In a fight with Elon Musk.
Thinking about what an absolutely minuscule percentage of entrepreneurs have been able to grow $28 billion in value. Let's go through a few different $28 billion lessons. What's a $28 billion secret? Or what's a principle that you feel like maybe you don't see other people emphasizing as much as they could for a $28 billion lesson?
I think it speaks back to your humility. I know my weaknesses, and so I acknowledge them. It was really important I hooked up with Declan Dugan because he could find great drug developers because he was 28 years, at Pfizer and head of global drug development. He knew, and he's a statesman in the sector. So he could find, I don't have that network. It's very, very important if we're going to build teams. So you have that person, and on the other hand, we start to talk finance and he goes, whoa, I don't do finance, So I think it's very important you recognize, and some people are blessed and have it all. And other people, you'd be very smart to, to figure out what your shortcoming is and bring it along. So that's number one. And then in doing that, find extraordinary people. I backed an insurance company because Nilesh Vasani, when I met him, was a savant. It was so clear he was a unique entrepreneur. And so I said, done, I'm in, and in his sector, I don't know very much about. And it's worked out incredibly well. So
yeah,
I think
what did you get in with them at, and what did it grow to?
Originally, I financed it with like 10 million, and I've subsequently added another 15 along the way, and we're still the major shareholder. We it's well over 200 million in market cap. And hats off to him. And he's done an extraordinary job because he was able to write code. It's called Chelsea Avondale. And he's been able to write code to differentiate between two houses that are beside each other and what their real risk is. Because one might be closer to the floodplain than the other one. So it's in Canada, and we didn't get stung with the wildfires. I think we had five homes, and he let a lot of people go and recycled our opportunity. Similarly in British Columbia where they had mudslides. So you find the extraordinary people. The other things that I would say is the perseverance. Everybody talks about that for, the entrepreneurs. And the last one is communication. Well, I shouldn't say last one because there's one more. And that is, I think a lot of the reasons I've been lucky is by being a nice person. Somebody easy to be around so that when you find the extraordinary, they're comfortable working with you. You're not a jerk. So we have a no asshole rule at my company, which I gather is a book now. But, fundamentally, I think that being a good communicator, being a good person can carry you a long way because people want to work with you.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about that element, it seems like so many of the biggest deals happen on relationship. Like you have to have something awesome to get in the league, but it doesn't win you the championship. At least that's my observation, right? But it's like
Right.
you have to have something awesome, and then you have to be able to build a relationship, or you have to like be magnetic enough, or have been able to develop your profile enough that people actually want to meet you. Or how do you think about that? Like not wanting to toot your own horn, but also needing to get the message out so that busy people actually want to see you.
Yeah, it's something I don't do well. So, I will acknowledge that. Happily, if you're successful, a lot of people do it. So you end up walking through the door. They've actually told people who you are, which makes life easier. Um, I think that you want to be factual, honest, and they talked about Jack Nicholson having the $1 million smile when he was young because he didn't smile that much, and when he did, it meant something. And I think that you've got to be mindful of that when you're tooting your own horn, and then just be factual. And I think you can do it. When people ask, I say I've had the good fortune of having my companies go through $28 billion by working with extraordinary people. So I'm not patting myself completely on the back, and it's true. It wouldn't have gone there without the people unequivocally. So I think you can do it so that you get the message across without having to say, "Look at
Yeah.
me, I built $28 billion," which
Yeah.
I didn't do. They did.
Well, I want to talk about this because I guess my question would be for this. Some CEO is saying like, well, if my product's good enough, why should I go to Saudi Arabia and be on the panel? Why should I do these speeches and stuff? Shouldn't the product be enough?
Yes.
What would you answer?
I
Or how would
mean,
you encourage them to maybe think beyond that?
I think there's certain companies and that you want to stay under the radar, so you probably don't want to go there for just for privacy and personal security, um, and B that your product doesn't need it. So this, in my case, for Saudi Arabia, it's completely different. My step down as CEO in January, turned it over to Richard Marshall, the drug developer. It was sort of like being the lead, the opening act for the Rolling Stones. So I passed him the baton, the Rolling Stones. But my raison d'etre is to try and convince the world that we need to change healthcare, which is really sick care, to prevention. That is economically sound principle. It's good for your people. I mean, your constituents. I mean, it's just it absolutely needs to be done. So for me, it was a no-brainer because this is a message that I think am very comfortable carrying and trying to pound. So at that panel, they asked, where will anti-aging and modifying aging be in 5 years? And most of the people in the audience were government people. I said, it's up to you. You know, Saudi Arabia could lead the world, because you can implement something very quickly if you change sick care to prevention. And I think that that's really true. So I think figure out what your message is and whether it's applicable to your company. And yeah, in my industry, it's very easy because I mean, if we're right and I can give you 10 more years, I just changed the world.
Yeah. No, I love it. Um, Maybe as we're closing down here, what's one more principle of going from zero to tens of billions?
Yeah. I think the big deals take as much time as the little deals. The big deals make you a lot more money, do big deals. Um, so I think that, as I said, finding the right partner and shooting for the moon, on get the money, which I've said throughout on, so not a brand new concept relative to what I've been saying before, but get the money, move it forward. If you're right, you know, try, I assume it's going to be big, get there. Don't worry about, um, giving up equity, get it there.
I love it. Um, well, so where should people be going if they want to find out more on the internet?
Um, if they want to find out more about the company, it's Juvenescence, which is really awkward to spell. So go to Juve Labs, Juv Labs, so .com, and there's lots of information there. If you need to get hold of me, there's an IR thing. Just click the IR and send it along. I'm also Greg at juvelabs.com. Now I'm not as active as other people in the company as I'm now executive chair. But if you have thoughts or questions, delighted to try and help. I mean, this really is, hopefully it's come across, this is a passion. I think it's something extraordinary that we can give back as scientists, investors, physicians, drug developers in this sector. Because if you're right and we live 10 years longer healthy, in Denmark, the normal discrepancy between you're healthy and when you die on average is 10 years. So some people are sick for 20 years. In Denmark, it's 3 years. So they're healthy until the last 3 years of their life. Wouldn't it be great if it was a week or an hour, before you weren't healthy? And so whatever we can do to do that, I mean, is extraordinary. And that should happen in the next 2 or 3 years. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's incredible. Maybe to close off, what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever received?
The one about mistakes. I made 1,000 mistakes, only make them once. Because you're going to make mistakes, and you can't let them haunt you. The number one quality they found in the best athletes, the Tom Brady's, the Michael Jordans, the Djokovic's in tennis, was the common quality that they had was they don't forget a mistake. Despite how well they played, how, what their thing it is, they remember that, on the seventh hole, they didn't hit it, properly. But they don't let it bother them during the game. But afterwards, they go back and they work on that shot 20 times or 100 times to get it so it's not a problem the next game. And I think that's how you have to think about being in business. Make my mistake. How do I change it and never make it again?
Okay, I said that was the last thing, but I want to go back to something else you had said. This idea of picking the right partner and shoot for the moon, right?
Yeah.
When the whole world is constantly telling people, be realistic, and there's so few people who are likely to see what you and your partner see. What advice would you have, or how would you think about navigating the world of knowing that everyone's going to shout at you to be realistic, and that people are going to, that's not something that you're going to walk around the room with your relatives at Thanksgiving. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. You could probably do that."
Run with that.
Right?
It's an interesting mix, of, again, it goes back to what are you good at and what are you not good at. So if you are starting a new company to sell household goods, what aspects do you have of that, and is it a big opportunity? And some people don't want it. There's lots of people who have a fear of failure, so they're never going to even try. I often ask younger people, I ask everybody, not just young people, Jess, how are you going to change the world? And everybody goes, "Oh, I can't change the world. How would I possibly change the world?" What are you passionate about, Jess? I'm asking you as a question, legitimately. What are you passionate about?
Oh, I'm just trying to be successful like Greg so that I can put all money into our child rescue, combating child trafficking, and then teach entrepreneurship around the world to help people out of poverty. It's one of the main causes of trafficking is economic vulnerability. And, you teach, there's these great organizations. I'm on the board of one. There's others that the follow-on effect of helping an entrepreneur enough to get past the awkward phase, and not just providing for their kids, but for many neighbors. Statistically, it lifts at least 4 to 6 families. Some of them it's multiples of that. I love entrepreneurs. I have a passion for entrepreneurship, and it just happens to be an extremely good poverty alleviation vehicle. And 14 years of working on child rescue. I can't tell you how many times I get emails from Navy SEALs, CIA, all sorts of people with the skill sets that we need to go up against these organized crime groups that are selling children as a business. And over, it is not a lack of know-how or a lack of skill set or a lack of cops willing to accept the help. It's almost always the fact that the government trains somebody in a skill set, this other government entity needs the skill set, but that Delta Force guy, that CIA case officer's spouse can only let them do so many free hours, and then they got to pay the bills. And so it's
Yeah.
almost always been a financial lack in between there. And, I wanted to be the Jason Bourne guy doing the undercover stuff. And I feel like I got, an answer from the big guy in the sky, like, I just want you to be the ATM machine, Jess, to pay for that. So,
And that's a profound way that you found your passion, which is this element of children being sold and embraced it. But the number of people say, I don't know, I can't do this, unlike you, to be honest. And it's why you are who you are. Like I'll say, somebody will say, the climate. I say, well, start a blog where people have to pick up 100 plastic bags off the beach. If you recruit 1,000 people, you just took 100,000 bags off, like a day, whatever it is. And so I think it's the same with business. I think you have to think in that same context that I can do this, I can change things. I'm not sure everybody will, but, and obviously your economic circumstance, if you've got 3 children, that are counting on you for a meal, then you got to, that's a different paradigm than shooting for the stars with a business. And that's equally important. You bring your family up. So your passion may not be that, and it's less about trying to build $1 billion company. I don't think that's for everybody. I had a patient come in because when I was practicing, and he said, I look at these, billionaire people, and why not me? And I said, I know a lot of them. I said, would you sacrifice your family to be that billionaire? He goes, of course not. I said, a lot of them did. So which is more important to you? And if the family was more important to you, then you've been wildly successful. You didn't have to build $1 billion business.
My second favorite billionaire of all time that's written books is Richard Koch, the guy who popularized the 80-20 principle. And it really is fascinating to me. I've got 4 kids, and this idea of like, if I, being the dad that I want to be and trying to become more like Greg Bailey, right? Like those things could be odds. And this idea of like, this idea of like continually pushing myself to find the 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20. I mean, mathematically, it means that, just under 1% of what we do should produce 51% of the results, which obviously the real world doesn't work that mathematically. But this idea that there's a very small number of things that have an incredible amount of leverage, I do believe. And this idea of like, my default is just work harder. And, my wife and I had a big discussion about a month ago about like, that I need to quit, that I need to quit working Saturdays and weekends. And we decided that we're going to do that. And like, that's our current thing right now is like, I'm trying to do this coming home at 5. And It's like really stretching me on the thinking because I can't like unthinkingly just work hard. Like I've got to think harder. I've got to use other people's time, AI, other things. If I'm going to do this, I come home at 5, right? Anyways.
Yeah, efficiency. Yeah, no, and I was on a panel in England, and the guy beside us said, tell me 5 things you do every day that you shouldn't be doing that would save you time, that would make your life simpler. And it was interesting because, everybody looks at it and like, what should I be doing? The real question is, what shouldn't I be doing, right? Well, good on you, Abe. Very, very good. And, hats off to you, what you're doing with the children. And what you're doing with these podcasts, giving people an opportunity to learn about these subjects, from a variety of people.
Well, sorry we went over. I really appreciate you spending so much time with us.
Jess, I look forward to seeing you, and thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, bye, everyone.